had experiences in your life that you wonder, why did I have to go through that? You think about life experiences. Every one of us have life experiences, and all of them are different. Every one of us, if we were to go around the room, we could share all of life's experience, and we sometimes think, why did I have to go through that? I've been there. I didn't understand a lot of the times in my life what God was doing. When He allowed something to happen in my life, maybe it was a sickness. So many people go through sicknesses and you wonder, why did I go through that? Or your husband, a loss of a spouse, a loss of a loved one, a divorce, a hurt, a pain, whatever. And we wonder sometimes, why did God allow that to happen in my life? I don't know about you, but I've asked that question many times. God, why did you allow that to happen in my life? God, you are a good God, but I don't understand. I know that you didn't send this, whatever it is, and there could be multiple things, but you've allowed it. For some reason, you have allowed me to go through whatever I went through. There's a reason for that. And today I want to share with you that it's not a waste. God doesn't waste anything. We are people who are wasteful people, right? You think about, I watch what the stuff people throw away. I like to drive by people's garbage and see the good stuff they throw away. I do. You can ask Linda, she'll tell you. If I go drive by and see something, I'm like, man, that's good. I'm going to take that. Because we're wasteful people. But we are wasteful people, but God never wastes anything in your life. I can promise you, as a follower of Jesus Christ for now some 35 or 40 years, I don't ever believe that God has wasted anything, any experience in my life. There's always been a time that He's been able to take that experience that I didn't understand and to shape me and to teach me and to open up a door that maybe would never have been opened up without that experience. God might be doing something right now in your life that you're like, what in the world are you doing? Well, guess what? God knows what He's doing. God understands what He's doing. Even if you and I don't, He understands why He's allowing some difficulty to come into your life and my life. God doesn't waste anything in our lives. There's not one experience, not one pain, not one hurt, not one failure, not one situation, or any experience in your life that God will waste. But what we need to begin to do is to see as a part of a bigger picture how God works in our life. Sometimes when we look at our life, we only look at it as a snapshot, and a picture is a moment in time. And it was that moment and that time, but instead of looking at it as a whole. You think about a movie. If you're watching a movie, you can stop a movie and pause a movie at any point in that film, right? But that's only one part of the film. And sometimes we look at life situations, things that happen to us in a brief snapshot, and we try to evaluate what God is doing in our life based on that one snapshot. And I'm here to tell you, I can't determine a movie other than there's only one thing I can determine based on a snapshot, and it's if you stop the Andy Griffith Show, then you will be able to see, I'll tell you what's going on in that show. All I have to do is really see one snapshot, one scene in that movie or that show, and I can pretty much tell you what is going on in that movie, on that show. But that's the only thing I can tell you. If you were to use another one, if you were to see another one, you wouldn't be able to experience and tell you what's going on. And sometimes we look at our life based on that little snapshot of what's going on at any one time in our life. And if we look at and try to figure out what God is doing at any one point in our life, we're most of the time going to get it wrong. If you just look at one little snapshot of your life and try to understand, God, what are you doing? Guess what? You are going to get it wrong because God has a bigger picture. I want to take you to one of my absolute favorite stories in the Old Testament. And we all know this story, but I want to give you a few snapshots of this story and talk to you about the life of Joseph. In the Old Testament, we see lots of different stories, but one of the people that I relate with and then think about in this situation is the man of Joseph. And so I want to share with you a few things about Joseph. I'm not going to open up the scriptures right now. I'm just going to give you a synopsis. Joseph was a huge answer to prayer to his mom and dad. His dad had children with another lady, but his mom and dad begged for children. They longed to have children. And they prayed and they prayed and they prayed. And all of a sudden, after a while, God gave them a child. And so, it may not have worked out the way they wanted it to work out. But here's something I want to share with you. At just the right time, when God had it in store, the life of Joseph came about through Jacob and Rachel. And so that was one situation. And they moved on and they had Joseph, and that was just one situation that looked really sticky and looked sort of ragged. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, that seemed like to be a waste. A waste. Because why did we have to wait so long for a child? Another thing that happened in this story of Joseph is Joseph became his father's favorite son. He had other children, but he became the favorite. And Joseph didn't have to work. Joseph didn't have to do the things that his brothers did. And not only that, but he also had this special coat that his father made for him. And so as Joseph's life began to progress, and things started to happen in his life, Joseph, it seems like as he looked back, that situation sort of didn't really make a lot of sense, and it seemed like that was all wasted. It seemed like it was all for nothing. Another thing that Joseph had this gift. He had this gift of interpreting dreams. So you ever wondered sometimes what your dreams mean? You have these dreams and you're like, is that from God? Is God trying to teach me something or whatever? But Joseph had this ability to interpret dreams. One day Joseph had a dream that his brothers were going to bow down to him. Well, I don't know. If I told my sister that she was going to bow down to me, she'd have probably laughed at me and we'd have probably gotten in a big fight. And so that's exactly what happened in the life of Joseph. Joseph went sort of bragging to his brothers and said, hey guys, someday down the road, you're going to bow down to me. So not only was there jealousy in the family already because he got this special coat, he didn't have to do all the work, but lo and behold, he's going to say now that we've got to bow down to him. So here's another situation. Joseph is interpreting dreams, and as his life went on, it just seemed like that gift was sort of a waste because he didn't understand what God was actually doing. One day his father sent him out to check on his brothers. And he was trying with the goodness of his heart to go check on his brothers and see what was going on. And his brothers saw an opportunity. His brothers saw an opportunity for, to get rid of this dreamer, they called him, named Joseph. And so what they decided to do is, Dad wasn't around, So what happens when dad's not around? You take matters into your own hands. Anybody ever done that when you were a kid? If mom and dad aren't watching, guess what? Take matters into your own hands. And they're like, well, we're tired. He's coming to try to get us into trouble, whatever. So they first thought they were going to kill him. And second, they said, well, we're just going to throw him in a pit. And they ended up selling him to some travelers, and they sold him into Egypt. And so this experience that he had as he was going to try to connect with his brothers and find out everything going on, if they needed anything, or he was going to take supplies or whatever, that experience in his life, and he got thrown into a pit, seems like, well, gosh, that was wasted. Remember this. The travelers were from Egypt. That's a very important point in this story. It wasn't any other country, but God ordained it and orchestrated it where Joseph was going to go to Egypt. So it seemed like that experience that he was going through was really just a waste. I don't know about you right now, but are you thinking about things in your life where you're like, Chad, I've had this experience or that experience. I've had this hurt, that pain. Maybe some of these are bringing some things up to you. There is a point to this story, and I'm going to get to it in a little bit. Another experience, he went to Egypt, and he went to a man's name named Potiphar. And here's the thing about the story of Joseph, is God's hand, no matter what Joseph did, God's hand was on him. No matter what Joseph did in his life prospered. It was always prospering. God's hand was always upon it. And so he goes to Potiphar's house, and finally, maybe things are starting to work out for him. And isn't this the way things happen? Just when you think things are working out, there's a wrench, there's something in the story. I mean, have you ever been there? Just when you think you know what's going to happen, all of a sudden a wrench is thrown in the story. I don't know about you, but it's happened to me many times in life. And so he thinks finally, okay, I'm getting settled in. I've got a good position. Potiphar's putting me in charge of more and more things. And all of a sudden, Potiphar's wife accuses him of attacking her. Well, if you are Potiphar, you're like, well, you were trying to attack my wife. So he was so angry with Joseph. Joseph didn't do anything wrong. He was not guilty of this, but his wife lied about him. And so here is a very sticky situation. And all of a sudden, lo and behold, Joseph is now in jail. And so that experience in Potiphar's house seemed like a waste. So now he is in jail. So he's been thrown into a pit, and now he's in jail. And lo and behold, one day he meets the cupbearer to Pharaoh. And all of a sudden, here's this experience where the cupbearer is thrown into jail, and Joseph meets the cupbearer, and the cupbearer has a dream, and guess what? Who can interpret dreams? But Joseph. Well, something he thought was gone and wasted and not going to be used anymore, now all of a sudden is going to be used again. And lo and behold, he interprets the dream. The cupbearer says, man, I'm going to remember you. When I get back to Pharaoh, I'm going to make sure to tell him about you. But you know what? Sometimes people forget. And so here is the experience where he is now still stuck in jail for 3 more years. And so that experience with the cupbearer seemed to be wasted. Then one day, if you know anything, and I've talked about being a cupbearer cupbearer was one of the most trusted people in the king's court or Pharaoh's court. And Pharaoh had a dream, a very troubling dream. And one day, the cupbearer realized that the king had a dream and nobody could interpret that dream. And he remembered that back in prison, there was a guy named Joseph who interpreted dreams for him. And he's like, hey, Pharaoh, I forgot. You know, how many times is our forgetter better than our memory? You know, it really is. Hey, there was a guy in prison, and I told him I was going to remember him. Well, it's 3 years later, but I'm going to remember him. And lo and behold, here's another experience. So he calls Joseph. And Joseph interprets the dream. And the dream was about the fact that there was going to be a huge famine in the land. And to prepare for the famine in the land, they had to be good stewards of the harvest at the time to be able to sustain during that time of famine. And Pharaoh was so impressed that finally somebody could interpret that dream that he put Joseph in charge of basically all of Egypt. So here he is once again, a dreamer, a dream interpreter, and all of a sudden it seems like, well, that was just another part of the story. And in fact, there was a famine in the land, in the whole world at that point. Even so, to the point where it affected not only those in Egypt, but also it affected his brothers and his father's house back where they came from, and it affected them as well. But they heard that in Egypt, there was a plenty. But you know what they didn't know? They didn't know who was in charge. They would have never dreamed that their brother that they sold into slavery and washed their hands of him, they would have never dreamed in a million years that the person they had to go ask for food from was going to be their brother. And that's what they did. They had to go back, go to Egypt, and they didn't even recognize him. It had been some 20-some years. They didn't recognize their brother. They would have never dreamed that it was going to be him in that position. And then after Joseph had a little bit of sense of humor. He toyed with him just a little bit. And eventually, he said to his brothers, hey, it's Joseph, your brother that you sold into slavery. Now, can you imagine that moment in time? Can you imagine how they felt to know that, oh my goodness, my brother now is in charge of everything in Egypt, and he could do worse to us than we did to him? Because of all the experiences, if you look at the whole story of Joseph, and it all seemed like a waste. Experience after experience after experience. But here's the thing we're going to learn in this passage that we're going to read this morning. God had not wasted anything. He used every experience, every one of the things that we talked about that seemed wasted, He used it. If you have your Bibles this morning, I want to share with you in Genesis 50. I love this passage. It's one of my favorite. Genesis chapter 50, verses 15 through 22. The brothers believed the only reason Joseph was even nice to them was that because of the dad. And I love this passage. When Joseph's brothers saw their father was dead, they thought, what if Joseph holds a grudge? They knew. They knew deep down that Joseph had the authority, the power to hurt them and repay them. And pay us back for all the wrongs we did to him. So they sent word to Joseph saying, your father left these instructions before he died. This is what you were to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father. When their message came to him, Joseph wept. Joseph wept. Why did he weep? Because Joseph had already forgiven his brothers. It had already been forgiven. He didn't need his father's encouragement to forgive his brothers because he had already done that. I believe somewhere from the pit to the position that he was in, he forgave his brothers. At some point, he forgave his brothers. So his brothers came and threw themselves down before him. We are your slaves. But Joseph said to them, do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? And here is a verse that I quote on a regular basis. You intended to harm me, but God intended for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Another verse that I've quoted and reminded myself, what you intended for evil, God used for good. So when someone hurts us and wants to use something, for evil against us, guess what? God can turn that to good. We serve a God who can turn the most evil thing in the world to good. So don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children. What if Joseph had never been thrown into the pit? He would have not been in the position to feed the generations. What if Joseph had never been accused of attacking Potiphar's wife? He would have never been thrown into prison. He would have never understood the culture. He went to the school of hard knocks, which where many of us go to those schools. He may have thought so many times, I wonder, this is a waste of time. But as we just read in this passage, he sees the big picture. That what his brothers intended for evil, God intended for good. It took all of those experiences for God to position him exactly where he wanted him. And sometimes I think we need to remember that all of the hurt, all of the pain, all of the experiences we go through in life may not be God punishing us, but he may be positioning us in just the right place at just the right time for something. What seems to be wasted. Brittany, will you help me just a second? What seems in our life to be wasted, God doesn't waste anything. You see, all of those, all of those scraps, all of those pieces, at first glance seem to be, they don't make sense. They don't make, it just seems like all of that is wasted. But in the reality is, God's not wasting anything. He is taking those scraps, those pieces, and making something beautiful of them. If it weren't for scraps and pieces, it may not look like this. In your life, what seems like a waste, God is pulling those together for a purpose. Sometimes we can't see it. Sometimes we don't understand it. But there are times when we can see it. And this is what Joseph at first probably just saw all the scraps and pieces. All the experiences. And it didn't make sense. All that he had gone through. But guess what? God knew what he was doing. God allowed it to make something beautiful out of your life and my life. There's nothing wasted. The pain, the heartache, the hard times, it's not wasted. Because you know what? God's making something beautiful out of our life. And he has a picture of what that looks like. And I pray today that you know that God doesn't waste anything. I love Romans 8:28. All things work together for good. It doesn't say all things are good. But somehow, some way, God's going to work it all together for something good and something beautiful. We might not understand it right now. And I'm sure there were times that Joseph, over that 20-some year period, didn't understand it. And I'm not justifying what his brothers did to him, because they were wrong. But what I am saying is that God didn't waste that experience. He sent him ahead to Egypt. And who knows what he's sending ahead of us to prepare a beautiful future. Will you bow your heads with me? Are you going through something today that you don't understand, that you're not grabbing a hold of? You wonder how in the world this plays into God's plan? I don't know. But I know he knows. And I pray that you know and I realize that all the scraps, all the pieces, God can pull together into something absolutely amazing. He's not going to waste any experience in your life, but he's going to continue to teach you. He loves you that much. Joseph wasn't forgotten about. God had a hand in what he was going through. Father, I pray today that we realize that. If there's somebody here today, Lord God, who's just going through a rough time and they need prayer, I'd love to pray with them. If there's somebody here today who maybe doesn't know you. Maybe it's taken all those broken experiences to get to the point where they're like, I need this Jesus. I need this relationship in my life. Father, I just pray as we sing our final song, if there's something someone wants to pray about, they'll come down and we'll share in that time. In Jesus' name, amen. Will you stand with us and sing our final song?